You know that feeling, right? That we're just drowning in data these days. We check our phones, scroll the news, look at everything going on, and it's just this uh, crushing weight, information overload. Don't worry, our brains just aren't built for, well, for all this 21st century complexity. But what if I told you that feeling, that sense of being overwhelmed, is actually, well, it's kind of missing the point. What if the problem isn't too much information coming in, but that the conscious part of it, the big you think of as I, is actually living in a state of almost like crippling information starvation?
That's a really interesting way to put it. And yeah, that counterintuitive idea is basically the core of Tor Nørretranders' work, especially his concept of the user illusion. The idea is that our conscious mind, it isn't some perfect mirror reflecting reality. It's more like a dramatically simplified interface, something built specifically to hide complexity. Think about the device you're listening on right now. You click on icons, you open folders, you interact with the desktop. That interface, that's the user illusion. It's designed perfectly to shield you from the, billions of calculations, the millions of lines of code, the incredible flow of electricity happening underneath. Nørretranders basically argues our consciousness, that feeling of being a single controlling I, is exactly that. It's a sleek, high level, but ultimately really simplistic mental image of ourselves.
Okay, so our mission today in this deep dive is to kind of pull back the curtain on that illusion. We're going to explore this absolutely massive gap between the flood of data our senses are taking in and the tiny trickle we're actually aware of. And in doing that, we'll try to define that powerful, non-conscious system working beneath the surface, what the sources call the me. So let's start with the numbers. The math of consciousness, which is frankly kind of humbling.
Right. So to really get a handle on this information gap, we need to think about information flow. Scientists measure this in bits. And when researchers first tried to quantify it, the sheer bandwidth of the human body, input from eyes, ears, skin, everything, and the numbers they found were just huge.
Yeah, enormous is the right word. They figured out that the total sensory input, everything passing from your physical receptors to your brain, it's like opening a fire hose of data. We're talking approximately 11 million bits of information flowing into your system every single second. 11 million bits a second. Wow. Okay, that's like high-definition reality constantly pouring into the unconscious parts of the brain. You'd think, or I'd assume anyway, that the conscious mind, the I, could tap into, I don't know, a decent chunk of that.
You would think so, but if you assumed that, you'd be completely wrong. Wildly wrong, actually. The conscious mind, the part that gives us that feeling of awareness, it only processes an incredibly tiny fraction of that total input. Almost negligible, really. The maximum conscious bandwidth we can reliably measure is, it's extremely low.
How low are we talking?
The figure you often hear cited is somewhere around 16 bits per second. 16. Now, even if we're generous, look at reading speeds or reaction time experiments, the absolute upper limit seems to be around 40 bits per second. Maybe.
Okay, hang on. 16 bits, maybe 40. Compared to 11 million coming in, that's not even a bottleneck anymore. That's like a microscopic pinhole in a giant dam.
Exactly. That comparison really drives it home. What this strongly suggests is that the real reality, the vast, detailed, high-resolution world, is actually experienced and navigated almost entirely by the unconscious me.
And suddenly, if we're only aware of, say, 16 bits, it makes perfect sense why trying to consciously calculate a tip while listening to directions and checking an email feels completely impossible. It's like we're trying to run all these complex programs through this one single, incredibly slow access port.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. The conscious I is like the operating system running on, I don't know, an old 16-bit processor from the 80s. But me, that's the supercomputer humming along underneath, handling 11 million bits without breaking a sweat. So yeah, the conscious experience is always going to be the limiting factor. The main insight here is that the information flow of consciousness is just orders and orders of magnitude below what our senses actually take in. The conscious part of us, the I, is basically paddling in the shallow end of the pool.
Okay. So if 99.999% of that 11 million bits doesn't make it to the conscious I, it's easy to just assume it gets deleted or lost. But the sources we're looking at suggest something else, that the real intelligence, maybe even the magic, happens in the act of discarding information intentionally. Which brings us to a concept I find really, really fascinating.
Right, you're talking about exformation. And this is probably Nørretrander's most critical idea, actually. Exformation is defined as, well, it's the information that is explicitly not present in a message, but is absolutely essential for that message to mean anything. It's all the context, the shared knowledge, the huge background database that got deliberately discarded or maybe compressed when the final message was created.
Okay. That sounds a bit abstract. Can you help ground that for us? Like, what does discarded meaning look like in, everyday life?
Sure. Think about a really good comedian. They tell a joke, maybe just a few words, and the room erupts. The information they actually delivered, the words themselves, that's tiny, but the laughter, that comes because the audience instantly accesses this massive amount of shared cultural understanding, political context, social norms, everything the joke points to without saying. All that unspoken stuff, that's the exformation.
Oh, okay. Or like an inside joke with a friend.
Exactly. You say one word, maybe make a gesture, and it instantly conveys this whole complex memory or shared experience. The word is the tiny bit of information, the depth of the shared experience, that's the exformation.
So meaning isn't necessarily created by piling on more data points, but by cleverly referencing what's already implicitly understood, by leaving out the noise. Order comes from rejection.
Precisely. And actually, if you look at information theory, going back to people like Claude Shannon, information, technically speaking, is defined by randomness, by unpredictability, by disorder. A long, random string of letters technically contains very high information content, but zero meaning. Meaning, order, structure, complexity. These things arise from the structured elimination of that high entropy randomness. You create order by throwing away disorder.
That completely reframes how I think about complexity. Usually we think complex means something is just long or detailed or has lots of parts.
Right, but Nørretranders really challenges that view. He defines complexity not just by length or current information content, but as logical depth, which means it's about the amount of effort, the amount of time, and crucially, the amount of discarded information that was necessary to arrive at that final, complex, often compressed state.
Okay, let me see if I get this. So, like, if I see a beautiful, intricate statue, its complexity isn't just the weight of the marble that's left. It's also about representing all the, billions of tiny flakes of marble, the potential information that the sculptor had to deliberately discard over time to reveal that final ordered form.
That's a perfect analogy, absolutely. And think about biology. The knowledge stored in a gene isn't just measured by how long the DNA strand is now. It's measured by the almost inconceivable number of non-viable genetic possibilities. All those discarded bits that had to be eliminated through eons of evolution and experience to finally produce that one successful, elegant sequence. Real intelligence, in this view, isn't measured by what you can hold on to, but by what you inherently know how to ignore or discard efficiently.
Wow. Okay, so thinking itself sounds like this massive, high-speed, most unconscious process of compression and discarding. But if consciousness, the I, is just this heavily compressed, simplified interface, does it actually run in real time? Is it perfectly synced with the world that the high-bandwidth me is experiencing?
Now we get to another really fascinating and slightly unsettling part of this user illusion idea. The answer is no, it's delayed. Brain science pretty consistently shows there's a fundamental lag. It's about half a second, 500 milliseconds between something actually happening in the physical world and your conscious eye perceiving it.
Half a second. That feels huge. Like if I'm driving and a car cuts me off, I slam the brakes, it feels instantaneous. I don't experience a half-second delay before I react.
Right, and that's because the eye isn't just receiving a delayed signal, it's running a very sophisticated simulation. Your brain performs this clever editing trick, it's sometimes called antedating. It essentially pushes your conscious experience back in time, presenting it to you as if it were happening simultaneously with the event itself.
Whoa.
So you experience this smooth, continuous reality, but that smooth reality is always, technically, a reconstruction. It's always slightly in the past, edited for continuity.
So the I is more like a spectator, watching a slightly time-delayed, edited broadcast of reality. And this, of course, brings us right to that classic thorny problem of voluntary action and, tell us about the Libet experiments. What did they show about who's really pulling the strings?
Right, the Libet experiments are seminal here. Benjamin Libet and his colleagues, they measured brain activity, specifically electrical signals, alongside people's conscious intention to make a simple movement, like flexing a wrist. And what they found was that a specific pattern of brain activity, they called it the readiness potential, basically the brain gearing up for movement, consistently started before the person reported consciously deciding to move.
Wait, hang on. The brain's physical process of preparing to move begins unconsciously.
Yeah.
Before I have the conscious thought, okay, now I'll move my finger.
That is exactly what the data suggests. The readiness potential starts about zero 0.3 to zero 0.5 seconds before the conscious awareness of wanting to move. The implication is pretty profound. The initiation of what feels like a voluntary action doesn't seem to come from the slow, serial, conscious I. It appears to bubble up from the high bandwidth unconscious me, which gets the whole process started.
Okay, but if the decision, or at least the preparation for the action, is already underway unconsciously, then what is my conscious choice? Is it just, like the source material asks, an illusion of control after the fact? Is the I just sort of signing off on something the me already decided?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It certainly seems to challenge our traditional notion of the I as the captain of the ship, consciously steering every action.
It feels like it fundamentally undermines our sense of self. If the me starts the action and the I only becomes aware later, doesn't that sound like a pretty severely limited kind of freedom? Not really free will in the way we normally think about it.
It definitely limits the role of the I as the initiator. But that leads to the crucial counterpoint in this framework. If the conscious I cannot initiate the action, what is its actual indispensable job? What real power does it have? And the sources argue that the true seat of conscious control, and maybe even free will, lies in the power of the conscious veto.
The veto, you mean like stopping things?
Exactly. We might not consciously initiate the urge to lift our arm or say something impulsive that might bubble up from the me, but we absolutely possess the conscious ability to choose not to lift the arm, to choose not to say the hurtful thing, to override the urge. The conscious I functions as the supreme executive editor. Its primary power isn't starting things, but selecting, controlling, and crucially vetoing the impulses and potential actions generated by the vast unconscious me. Think of it as the brakes, maybe, rather than the accelerator. And that power to inhibit, to choose not to act, is still a profound form of control and moral agency.
Okay, I see. So the roles are kind of split. The me is the fast, intuitive, expert originator, the source of ideas and impulses. And the I is the slower, more deliberate, maybe moral editor with veto power. Let's explore how this me versus I dynamic plays out in things like expertise or skilled performance.
Yeah, that's where it gets really practical. The me, remember, is that high bandwidth parallel processor. It handles 11 million bits a second. This is the source of all truly fluent skills. Think about the intuition of a chess grandmaster who just sees the right move, or how you ride a bike without consciously thinking about balance, or a musician improvising effortlessly. When you're performing any complex skill at your absolute peak, what's happening? Often your conscious I kind of fades into the background, doesn't it? You're just doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the moment you start consciously thinking about it, okay, how exactly am I balancing on this bike, or what note should I play next? That's when you stumble.
Precisely. If the slow, analytical I tries to intervene in a process the fast, parallel me has mastered. Say, you consciously break down your golf swing mid-swing. Your performance usually tanks immediately.
Right, we call that choking under pressure. It's
Yeah.
the I getting in the way of the me.
Exactly. And because the me is operating on literally millions of times more information direct from reality than the I, 11 million bits versus 16, the sources strongly suggest we should probably trust our hunches, our intuitions, our gut feelings far more often than we typically do. Your intuition, generated by the me, is arguably closer to the high-resolution reality than your deliberate, conscious analysis based on those 16 bits.
So that gut feeling isn't just some vague mystical thing. It's potentially the output of a massive parallel processor that's crunched way more data than you consciously know.
That's the idea. That deep knowledge, that exformation built up over years of experience and unconsciously discarded data, often manifests as that feeling of confident familiarity or intuition.
And if we manage to actually do that, to step back, let the I relax its grip, and trust that vast unconscious competence of the me, what kind of state does that lead to? The sources mention something called the sublime.
That's right. The sublime, in this context, isn't just about looking at a mountain. It's a state you can achieve in complex activity. It could be in art, in sports, even in really deep flowing conversation. It happens when the conscious I trusts the unconscious me enough to just let things flow, to let the skill or the life or the interaction happen freely without constant second guessing or deliberate control, without needing to hit the veto button all the time.
And what does that feel like?
It's characterized by a sense of confidence and deep familiarity. You feel at one with the activity. This feeling of trusting complexity, of being completely at home within a situation because you trust your non-conscious system to handle it. It reminds me of the Danish concept of hygge. It's not just about candles and blankets. It's that profound sense of comfortable, confident coziness that comes from being perfectly at ease, often within a complex or dynamic setting, because your me is handling it beautifully.
Hmm. This whole deep dive really suggests a pretty radical rethink of what it means to be, skilled or knowledgeable or even well-informed. It's not about cramming more facts into the conscious eye. It seems to be much more about cultivating the tacit knowledge within the me and then, crucially, developing the wisdom to know when to trust it and let go of the I's need to control everything.
Absolutely. Ultimately, that conscious user illusion, the I, it's indispensable. We need it to communicate, to plan sequentially, to function in society. It provides that simplified map. But we have to understand its severe limitations. The path to real mastery, to tapping into the incredible depth of knowledge you actually possess, involves accepting the limits of that conscious self, and then finding deliberate ways to engage and leverage the immense power and wisdom of the unconscious me.
It's quite a thought that you, listening right now, contain this incredible reservoir of tacit knowledge you use constantly, effortlessly, but often couldn't explain how if you tried. And the sources suggest that maybe our modern world, very linear, very scheduled, full of straight lines and simplified rules, is maybe designed too much for the slow, describable, 16-bit conscious eye.
That's a key point. The powerful me seems to thrive on richness, on novelty, on complexity, on the kind of unpredictable, high bandwidth information that the messy natural world provides in abundance. So ironically, the problem in our supposed information age might actually be a kind of sensory poverty. The simplified, predictable environments we often build might contain too little genuine, complex information to really engage and nourish the full potential of the me.
Okay, so building on that, here's a final thought for you to maybe carry into your week. It connects this idea of complexity, the me, and that border between order and chaos. We've heard that the me builds its deep, complex knowledge through time, experience, and discarding information like evolution or learning a skill. And we know that true complexity, real learning, often seems to emerge right at that edge, where comfortable order meets manageable chaos. So think about one area of your life. Could be a skill, a routine, maybe even a relationship. Somewhere you feel pretty confident, very familiar, maybe even a bit too comfortable. What small, deliberate disruption could you introduce there this week? What border between cozy order and stimulating chaos could you try walking along? Just enough to nudge your 11 million bit unconscious me to discard some old assumptions and maybe, just maybe, generate some new, deeper, more complex knowledge. Something to think about.